Hello, everyone, and welcome to Forensics Talks. This is episode 61. And today, my guest is Eddy De Valck, who is going to be speaking to us about the disaster victim identification, both in Belgium and internationally. Don't forget, we are live streaming to YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and also now podcasting. So we're taking these episodes, and what we're going to be doing is just extracting the audio and placing them on there at the suggestion of a few people who were interested in working and listening at the same time. So there are not all the episodes are up just yet, but we do have a whole bunch, maybe 30 episodes or something like that. So you can always check that out on your favorite podcasting service or whatever that might be. Also, if you have any comments, so in the comments section, please let us know where you are from. I always like to welcome people and like to know where people are from around the world. And so just let us know in there what city you're watching from or what country you're watching from. And I'm just going to type that in there where you are from. And we are going to get started here. Okay, great. Well, Eddy De Valck is somebody who I met at the Forensic Photography Symposium back in January of this year. So that was a symposium that I held, and he was talking about documentation and photography and things like that. But at the time when I met him, I said, hey, I got to get this guy on Forensics Talks because he has a wealth of knowledge and a ton of experience. And Eddy's worked as a forensic odontologist since 1979, and he received his Master of Dental Sciences from Catholic University Leuven in 1977 and attended Belgium's Ministry of Justice School for Criminology. Eddy has taught as an associate and guest professor in undergraduate and postgraduate training courses on jury prevention and risk management, quality promotion in dentistry, forensic odontology, and mass disaster management, speaking at universities in Belgium, the UK, Italy, and also for Interpol. Mr. De Valck Dr. De Valck has also served as a court expert for civil and penal courts on litigation cases and dental damage evaluation, and he's authored textbooks on forensic odontology and legal medicine in French, English, and Dutch. He served as Chief Forensic Odontologist on the Disaster Victim Identification Team for the Federal Police Belgium, and also with DVI services with Interpol. He's participated as an expert in about 20 major disaster investigations since 1987, train accidents, plane, boat disaster, including the 2004 tsunami in Thailand, the aircraft disaster, the MH17 in 2014, the 2016 Brussels terrorist attacks, and also the 2021 Belgium floodings. So let me bring him in here. And there he is. Hello, Eddy. Welcome.
Hello, Gene. Well, thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate your time here. This is the second time I've gotten you to speak, so I appreciate it. Well, let's get started here with you, and I want to ask you about your background. I'd like to ask you about your interest early on. So, when you started your career in the 1970s, were you intent on being a traditional dentist, or were you actually looking at the whole area of disaster victim identification at an early time?
No, it's a funny story. I was going to graduate, and I was like a co-assistant, as we call it, to the lower degree students. And one night we got the opportunity to assist to a lecture from a Belgian dentist, and he was going to talk to us about forensic dentistry. And at that time, the term forensic, I had no clue what it meant. Because in the Dutch, in the Flemish language, a forens is somebody who commutes by train to his work.
Okay.
Well, this is something strange. But then he came and he was so enthusiastic. And at that time, I knew I was gonna be a GP, a general practitioner. Eventually, I was gonna go for a specialty, but I didn't know which one. And nothing really triggered my interest. And so I heard this guy and I thought, this is it. This is what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I immediately contacted him. And it didn't really exist in Belgium at that time. Actually, there were just a few countries, the Scandinavian countries, a little bit in the UK, a little bit in the US, and that was it. And so we started from there, 3 young guys. They used to call us the Boy Scouts because we were still so young. at that
Okay.
time. I was 23, 24 when I started my career in forensic odontology. Can you imagine? Just getting out of dental school.
Wow. Yeah. And
But
so did you work as a dentist, like with a
yeah,
practice or?
yeah,
Okay.
I've been, since I graduated in 1977, I started as a general practitioner, and I've been doing that until 3 years ago when I retired. But I always combined it with forensic odontology. And that is where this criminology thing that you mentioned in the introduction comes from. I was taking my last exams, and one of my professors said, "So, what are you going to do after you graduate?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to be a forensic dentist,
Okay.
and I think I'm going to need to study criminology at university first." And he said, "Well, let me make a couple of phone calls." And so he called the dean of the faculty there, and the guy told him, "No, it's not that. That wouldn't add something to his knowledge. But I know a place, the Ministry of Justice. They have a school for criminology and criminalistics." And so he put me in contact with the director there, and I did another 2 years there. Actually, after that, I became a teacher at that school as well.
Oh, really? Okay. And of course, you being there as a dentist, I can't imagine there was another dentist there unless they were one of your
No,
colleagues.
absolutely not.
Okay. Yeah.
Most of the people there, most of the people were policemen, lawyers, scientists, and they had never heard about forensic dentistry. So I
Right.
was I was really, like um, the white bird there.
Right. Well, you've already alluded to this a little bit in the opening here, but what was the state of forensic odontology, forensic dentistry in 1977, both in Belgium and abroad, like globally?
Well, in Belgium, it was mostly done by the forensic pathologists with their, I'm sorry to say, with their little knowledge they had about teeth. But they did the work. Identification based on forensic or on teeth was not known. And as I said in my little introduction, we knew a couple of guys in the UK. We knew a number of people in Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and then there were some people in the US. Raider Sugnes at UCLA was one of them. He was a Norwegian that emigrated to and became a professor in California. And we knew them from the publications. And just imagine, we're talking 1977. Yeah, we didn't have the internet, so we had to look up in books. I remember I started buying books on forensic odontology, the few books that were available, and I looked at the articles, and then I had to go to the university library and I had to order the article, wait for 6 weeks before I would get it, and then I would get the article and I would start reading. That's the way it went back in those days.
What kind of organizations were around then, like early on?
As far as I know, at that time, none. Just a few a few years later, IOFOS was started, the International Organization of Forensic Odontostomatology. I remember. I'm sorry. I remember that we were kind of pushing, and we had all these contacts, and the Netherlands and the US had this terrible accident in Tenerife in 1978, and we went to see those Dutch dentists that had done the identifications, and from there you meet them there, and then there was the International Association of Forensic Sciences, who had their triannual meetings, and that's where we met with other people. And then the idea was that, well, we should try to do something together. And so basically, the first DVI meeting, if you can call it that way, was held in the Netherlands. And there were people from about 11 or 12 countries, and pathologists, police people, odontologists, other scientists. And they sat together and they said, hey, we got to do something together. This is this requires a multidisciplinary approach. Let's do something with this. So then we took it to Interpol, and they had started something already, but then it developed from there, basically.
I see.
A lot of those people went to Interpol, and as you know, or probably don't, we meet every year at Interpol at the either in Lyon or in Singapore now, and DVI teams from all over the world. It's a meeting with about 250 people. They come there, they share their experiences, they tell us, they show us the kind of disaster they were dealing with, how they dealt with it, what the problems are that they were running into, how they solved it, and then they're making some suggestions for improvement. And then we take that to the general group, and we try to implement it in the protocols, which, as you're showing here on the Interpol website, we try to incorporate them in the guidelines, the DVI guidelines, which are published on the internet by Interpol. We will have this meeting at the end of June this year. Because of Corona, because of COVID, we hadn't had a meeting for the last 2 years, but now we'll be happy to meet in person again and network and share experiences and discuss issues. It's really a good venue. It's really a good meeting for that.
Yeah, I noticed there is a ton of documents on here, and they're all sort of publicly available. I've actually placed a link inside of the chat window for those that are interested. But you have there's a good document here. This first one that says disaster victim identification sort of gives you a good grounding in sort of what it is and sort of how it works. But I've noticed that you have all kinds of like forms and all kinds of things here. Okay.
Yeah, these are the documents. You got two things. You got the guidelines, which describes the protocols for each of the different phases, search and rescue, post-mortem, antemortem, reconciliation, identification. That's described in there, how to work. And then all the information that is gathered is written down on the Interpol forms. The advantage of those is that they are universal. They exist in 4 languages on the Interpol website: English, French, Arabic, and Spanish. But most countries have translated these forms into their own languages. And so it's very easy. It's very easy to work with. The big advantage of this is that it's a uniform way of dealing with whatever you have to deal with.
Right.
All the issues, there's different papers for the police, there's for the pathologists, for DNA people, for anthropologists, for odontologists. And so everybody takes care of their own part. We, the odontologists, we have the 600 pages, and we complete these in a protocolized way. We have abbreviations that we use, so that even if you don't understand my language, you can see what's written there.
Right.
Every item's got a number. So even if you don't understand it, you look at the number, you see what's written there. Just an example, a composite filling, a white filling, is a tooth-colored filling. So the abbreviation for that is TCF.
Okay.
If it's metal, it's MCF, metal color filling. And so every treatment has got its own abbreviation, which you don't have to read. You just look at the abbreviation, and then you do that in PM and you do that in AM forms. And, you just bring them together. You reconciliate them, and that's where we get to our identifications. That's basically what we do at Interpol.
Right.
And these forms and these guidelines, they're reviewed every 5 years. I think that this year we're up for review. We have been asked for remarks, for comments, and these will be taken to the meeting in June and will be discussed in different subgroups. And then the subgroups will bring it to the general meeting. and then we'll see what is accepted. It's voted on. It's a very democratic group of people, and so we'll probably have new forms after June 2022.
Okay, I want to ask you about some of the beginnings of forensic odontology and perhaps even DVI, but more specifically forensic odontology. And actually, there's a document. It's a great document. Actually, I'm going to put this link up in the chat window too, because it is a good read. And for anyone that's interested on some of the historical aspects, and this is something that that you wrote, Eddy, a while back. So it says chapter 1. So is this part of a larger text?
Yeah, this is a textbook. This is the latest textbook on forensic odontology, which was published by IOFOS. You can see it there, Introduction to Forensic Odontology, and IOFOS. IOFOS is the International Organization of Forensic Odontostomatology, and Professor Burkic from the University of Zagreb is our actual president. And he had the great idea of bringing a number of authors together and ask them individually to write about certain aspects of forensic odontology. Knowing my long-time service on forensic odontology, he said, well, you should write about history. You're about the oldest one. And so I gathered some of the, let's say, the most distinctive cases of forensic odontology, starting at the Romans, Agrippina killing a rival and asking the murderer to bring. That's why the story is called Head on a Plate. She asked, well, that's the way they did it in the Roman times.
Right.
And she asked to bring the head on a plate. She was sitting at the dinner, assisting at a dinner, and she knew that her rival had a crooked upper front incisor. And so when the head was brought on a plate, she opened the mouth, she looked at it, she said, yep, it's her, it's okay. And she was happy. Mission accomplished. The hitman was paid, and everybody was happy. I introduced Charles the Bold. He was the Duke of Burgundy, and he was trying to expand his reign. And he was killed in a battle in France, and his body was left on the battlefield. And his servant went back the next day with some friends, and they found the body, which of course had been ripped off from everything. So it was they were all naked bodies. It was winter. It was in the snow. They recognized him because he has lost some teeth from a fall from a horse. And so again, they opened them out and they said, "Oh yeah, this is him." And they took it, and he was supposedly to be buried in Bruges. That's the next picture in the text. Mm-hmm. Very, very nice grave with his wife. But some research was done, and actually a paleontologist found out that the body that's in the grave there is not Charles the Bold. There was an intermediate graveyard that he was put in, and he was only brought to Bruges 50 years later. And they must the coffins must have been mingled or whatever. For the U.S., the murder at Harvard, the Webster Parkman case. But the most important is probably the Bazar de la Charité in France, a charity event, and the building caught fire, and quite a number of people were killed. And as it was a charity event, a lot of them were from the high nobility of Paris and France. One was even the sister to the Queen. And so there was a lot of pressure for identification. Of course, it was heavy fire. It burned for a long time, and they had a hard time. Finally, they called in an American dentist who was practicing in Paris. And he was known to be the treating dentist of most of this nobility. and he showed up with his dental records, which were absolutely amazing. Sometimes when I look in the book, because there was a thesis from Professor Amoedo written after that, and when I look at those drawings, I'm jealous of what they got to identify, and when I compare it with what we get these days. But anyway, he assisted in most of the identifications of those victims.
So that was Dr. Oscar Amoedo.
No, that was Dr. Davenport.
Oh, Davenport. I'm sorry. I thought you said Dr.
A couple of years later, Professor Amoedo, Oscar Amoedo, who was a Cuban who practiced in Paris, he published his thesis, and it was called in French L'art dentaire en médecine légale, the art of dentistry in legal medicine. And this is like a 500-page textbook with a lot of drawings, but basically focusing on odontology, on dentistry. And he describes a lot of the techniques that were used there. And that's why I call it consistently the Bible of forensic odontology. Okay. And when I'm reading through it, I got an old copy that I purchased. I'm very happy with it. And when I read it, I think, well, we could still do it this way today. No problem. It's amazing. I might publish sometime about the techniques that were used then and how they evolved and what we're doing now, and then just making comparison between both.
Would you say that Dr. Amoedo then is sort of like the grandfather or the father of
you could call him the godfather of forensic.
The godfather. maybe the godfather. Okay. Let me ask you another question about, I'm not sure if we should move into some of the cases, but maybe I'll ask you about some of the problems, because you alluded that, early on, for example, with some of the disasters that happened. And actually, let me go back. I think the one in, it was the Herald Free Enterprise, the ferries which I guess it toppled over or keeled over just off the port of, is it Zeebrugge?
Zeebrugge in Belgium.
Okay. Yeah.
It's actually a ferry. It was a ferry service between Zeebrugge and Dover. So from Belgium, from the continent to the UK.
And there was like 190 people that died on that one.
193 people, 192, 93, they're not sure. Mm-hmm. That ship was what they call a row ship, roll on, roll off, which means that the bow doors go open on both sides, and the cars and the trucks just go in on one side and drive out on the other side. Now, what happened was that it left the Zeebrugge harbor, and the crew didn't close the doors when they were taken off. The sea was kind of rough, and so water started coming in, and the ship started moving left to right and finally capsized. Now, as the bow doors were open, a lot of water came in immediately, and people got trapped in it. Mm. Some people escaped. It was quite a busy connection, because at that time, a lot of the people that were on the ship had won that trip with a £1 ticket from a popular British newspaper. So there were a lot of people on the ship there, and the ship capsized, it sank. I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 56 people, dead bodies, got recovered immediately, but then they had to bring upright the ship again. That took about 2 months when they did it. And actually, I started coming in. That was my first disaster. I started coming in when they were searching for the other bodies, and I was brought in by my British colleagues who called me, and they said, "We need you there. We need a Belgian dentist there, because there is it's Belgian territory. The citizens are British, so that requires a British team, but we also require a Belgian team for legal purposes. And we need a DVI team." We had just started one in Belgium. still without an odontologist. And my British colleague said, "Well, to the Belgian pathologist, he said, well, we know that you got forensic odontologists." And they said, "Oh, really? Yeah." They said, "Yeah, Eddy De Valck is one of them." And they said, "Well, yeah, call him in." So one of my British colleagues called me and they said, "Hey, we want you here. Come over." So we processed. Sorry for the expression. We examined 123 victims in 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very intensive work. At that time, we didn't have computers yet to compare. Fortunately, between the time of the disaster and the post-mortem, we had about 3 months, which meant that there was a good time for preparation for ante-mortem gathering. And so the ante-mortem, which is the most difficult part in a mass disaster, the ante-mortem was there. I can still see that picture. I was staying with a British odontologist. We were in a hotel room, and they had like a couple of cardboard boxes on the floor. And males, females, adults, children, and then protheses, no protheses, teeth, no teeth, fillings, crowns. Just 6 or 8 or 10 boxes on the floor. And anytime we would get a post-mortem record out and say, "Hey, I got one with a crown, and it's a male," we would just go to one of the boxes.
Yeah. At that time, I mean, because it was a little bit early on, what kind of did you have any issues dealing with these two countries and different methods or standards? Was there any sort of things that had to be resolved that way?
No, the only thing that was different, and of course they were doing the identification. Basically, I was assisting them. For me, it was all the notes that were in those antemortem records. Dentists use abbreviations for treatments, for materials, and most of them were handwritten at that time. And so it was not always easy to know what was written. And of course, you had to fill out the antemortem form. But Eugene, let me tell you, it's still the same these days. Sometimes I have to call the practicing dentist and say, "Hey, can you explain this to me? What did you write down?" They use codes.
Right.
I remember one case where there was an inconsistency between a filling and a crown, and on the X-ray we thought to see something that could be a crown, and in the record it was written crown, but on the post-mortem observation it was a huge amalgam filling, which of course on an X-ray gives the same or almost the same view. And so we had to contact the dentist, and finally it was solved by the dental assistant, who said, "Oh, that was me writing down that we had planned to do a crown, and I had already made the note of it, but it hadn't been done yet."
Okay.
So these are just the little things that you run into every time, even today.
Yeah. Let me ask you about because I mean, you've worked on a number of very big, I'm not sure what to call them, but just disasters and things like that.
Disasters, yeah.
Yeah, and so the Malaysia Airlines, the Flight 17, that was
yeah.
Yeah, MH17. Sorry, yeah, that one. That's the one that got shot down right over the Ukraine. So, and I know that I have some colleagues in the Netherlands, and they did a lot of work, and possibly are still doing a lot of work on that effort. But how did you get involved with that? How did you get called in to assist, and how big was the crew of forensic odontologists that were in attendance there?
Well, let me first tell you how we got in there. When these mass disaster happened, Interpol sending out a note to the country where it happens, saying, "Hey, listen, this happens. We know it's not easy. If you need any help, Interpol can provide you with help. That's one part. At the same time, Interpol sends out notes to the different countries with DVI teams saying, hey, we got this issue. In case it's necessary, would you be willing to assist and to provide help? So when the country where it happens says, yes, we need help, then they're going back to the different countries saying, okay, and they're looking who wants to help. So this is exactly what happens.
So does
with
Interpol have like a list of registered people with them?
Yeah, Interpol, there are, if I'm not mistaken, there are about 5 permanent people working on DVI at Interpol. So 5 liaison officers, and they manage the whole thing. We in Belgium, for example, and that's not in every country the case, we have a permanent staff of 7 people at the Federal Police who are dealing with DVI. But so there was a situation in Ukraine with the rebels and the Russians, and basically it was a war zone. So there was the problem of getting there and do the search and rescue. So when Ukraine said yes, we could use help, then the problem was, okay, where are we going to do the search and rescue? Where are we going to do the PM? Are we going to do it in the Ukraine, with the risk, of course, of being in a war zone, with the risk of all the people involved? It's a Malaysian Airlines plane. Are we going to do it in Kuala Lumpur? Or most of the victims were Dutch because the plane took off from Amsterdam. So, or are we going to do it in the Netherlands? So then finally the decision was made, okay, we're going to do it in the Netherlands. And then some countries decided, yes, we can help. And I believe we had teams from Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, Germany, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Netherlands, of course. I think that's about it. And so all these countries came with their teams. And at the military base, we set up the post-mortem room. If I'm not mistaken, there were 3 or 4 lines, as we call them, with the different stations. And so basically each country worked on a line. We as the Belgian DVI team went there with about 20 people, specialists in fingerprints, forensic pathologists, odontologists, and just regular policemen. And so we worked alongside the other countries with the Interpol guidelines, with the Interpol forms. That's the easy part on this. You know how to do it. You have the forms, and you just do the work the way it's supposed to be done.
Mm-hmm. Is there an advantage to, like, I shouldn't say an advantage, but for example, when there is a situation like a plane crash where they all have passports, they're all registered on a flight or something like that, versus, for example, the ferry where people just drive on, your name isn't really recorded or anything. How what kind of difficulty do you have in the case of a plane crash?
Yeah, well, that's what we call them open disasters or closed disasters. An open disaster is where you don't know who the victims are, and you don't know how many victims you have in the beginning, of course. That ship or natural disasters, tsunami, for example, is a typical example of an open disaster. The floodings in Belgium, typical disaster, the typical open disaster. When you have a passenger list, and you know how many people were on this plane, well, then it's supposed to be, those things are never easy, let me tell you, but it's supposed to be easier. Now, an open disaster will evolve into a closed disaster with time, as you will get the list of missing people. You will get way too many in the beginning, but then that list, just decreases. The number of people on the list decrease because people call in and say, hey, sorry, I thought that my son or parent was there, and
Hmm.
they actually called me and said I'm fine. So until you get your final list, and then it becomes a closed disaster. And then you can start contacting the families of the missing people, the supposed victims, and you ask for all the elements that you will need for comparison. That's what we call the AM. That's what the AM team does. The antemortem team does.
Hmm.
Through the family, they will get the name of the treating dentist. They will get the name of the treating doctor. They will get all kind of information that will be used for identification.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking about, imagining I mean, it can be quite horrific, the scene of a plane crash or
Oh yeah,
potentially like a fire where a lot of the bodies may be just very little remaining. So you may be finding parts or pieces. But one of the advantages of using the teeth, as I've read, is it's one of the hardest substances or one of the most difficult to destroy in the human body.
yeah. It's the hardest component of a body. It will resist for a long time to all kind of exterior agents like water, air, soil, even fire, and even acids. We had a case in Belgium. DVI also does individual cases, and we had
Mm.
this big murder case, multiple murder case, where the culprit dissolved his victims in 96% phosphoric acid. And long story short, we um, came across it, and we said, okay, we have to try if this is possible. This was the story told by his daughter, who he forced to work with him. And we said we have to know. So we got a body that was donated to science, and we did this scientific experience where we put the body into the same container with the same substance, and then we saw, and in about 8 or 9 hours, the body had dissolved, except for the teeth.
Hmm.
Um, just to tell you, even with fire, long time fire, we had a couple of cases, big crash on the motorway, and long time people in their car, they got stuck in their cars. Teeth are well protected. They're well protected in the mouth. The roots are even better protected because they're in the alveolar bone.
Mm.
So even if your crown, if the coronal part of your tooth is burned away, you have a good chance that your root is still intact, and that you can use that, and then you can X-ray that. And if you're lucky, you can compare that with X-rays from antemortem information.
That brings me to something else actually, and I'm trying to look for it here. But there was an article that I had read somewhere where is it called a Nomad machine or something
The
for
Nomad
X-rays?
machine, yeah, the Nomad machine is a portable digital dental X-ray machine. It was introduced at the time of Tsunami in Phuket. I was working in Phuket immediately in the beginning, the first 2 weeks after the tsunami, and we didn't have the Nomad yet, so we were still shooting X-rays with the old conventional machines, telling people
Hmm.
shoot and get away and whatever, and then having to develop it and waiting until it was developed to see if the body could be stored, and then came the Nomad, and you had the image immediately. And since then, that's been the big thing, or one of the big advantages that have come into DVI. And I had been begging the Belgian government for 10 years um, to buy a Nomad for the DVI, and
Hmm.
no, 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 and it was too expensive. And so with the terrorist attacks, I had been in the business for a long time, so I knew quite a bit of people. And I got a phone call from somebody in the US saying, "I know what you need." I said, "Yeah, I know." And he said, "You need a Nomad, right?" I said, "You're absolutely right." He said, "Well, okay. I got a guy in the Netherlands who works for the German company that owns the Nomad now, and he's going to contact you. And so the guy contacted me and he said, well, you need a Nomad? I said, please. He said, okay, I'll come to Brussels tomorrow and I'll bring you a Nomad and you keep it as long as you want and you use it. And that helped us a lot because then we could start shooting X-rays immediately.
Right.
And that allowed us to identify 28 of the 31 victims in 3 days based on dental elements.
So that's so it's like a completely digital machine. You get like a electronic.
It's a very light. It's you know the kind of gun that the policemen catch you with when you're speeding.
Yeah, a LiDAR gun or like
they're holding up in their hand. Well, that's what a Nomad looks like.
Oh, that's small, really tiny.
Yeah. It weighs about, the first edition weighed at 7 kilos, so that's not really. It's easy to work with. There's protection, radiation protection on it, and everything. And I think all DVI teams these days do use a Nomad. We finally eventually got one as well.
Oh, you did. You did.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Is this what it looks like right here?
That's exactly the one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I had no idea they made something that small.
Yeah. And there's a Korean one. From what I heard recently, Nomad stopped the production, and there's a good Korean device now that can be used, and that has the same advantages of the original Nomad.
I see. You had mentioned so you'd already mentioned the floods and the terrorist attack also in Belgium. So during those events, were you strictly working in Belgium, or were you working in other areas too?
No, for these ones we were working in Belgium. Of course, the one with the terrorist attacks. One of the attacks was at the national airport, and so. I don't know the exact number, but I think we had victims from 17 or 18 different countries.
Okay.
And then the problem, as I said earlier, gathering the AM information is the most difficult because you have to get in contact with the local DVI teams if they exist. Technically, you go through official channels, although even with the terrorist attacks, we had some problems with some country and getting the information, and I was coming back. My PMs were done. I had seen all the victims and came back to the reconciliation area, and we don't have this, we don't have that yet. And I said, okay, give me 15 minutes. Picked up my phone, got into my register and called my good friend, forensic odontologist in that country. Mm-hmm. And I said, hey, listen, we need 2 antemortem records. These are the names. These are the supposed dentists. And sure enough, 1 hour later, I got them.
Yeah.
And that's the nice part about this forensic odontology community. We know each other. We see each other at Interpol. And the same thing happened there was a terrorist attack in Stockholm, and one of the victims was Belgian. And they also had a problem. So my colleague Irina called me. I will never forget that because I was at a restaurant function, and for 45 minutes I was sitting in a corner with my mobile phone, an internet connection, and texting, messaging back and forth, contacting the dentist, getting X-rays. Transferring the X-rays to Stockholm. Mm-hmm. And 10 minutes later, she called me. She said, I love you forever. The identification is done.
Wow.
That was a Saturday night identification made from a restaurant.
Well, it's funny, though, because you're talking about, like, so for example, early on, you talked about making phone calls and, maybe getting faxes or like whatever back and forth early on. But now with the internet, there's some advances. Obviously, people can email you digital records and things like
Absolutely.
that. But what's interesting is you still got to pick up the phone and call. There's no way, there's no central, like a fingerprint database, there's no odontology database. So has anyone thought about doing something with like a central database?
Yeah, I was. after the floodings, because at the floodings, the problem we had was that dental offices were destroyed by the floodings as well. And so all information was lost. They had the same issue with Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. And we started on a Thursday. So we had to call the health insurance companies because that's where you can get antemortem information as well. But it was Thursday afternoon. So it was Friday by the time we could contact them. And yeah, Friday by 3:00, they stopped working. So yeah, we'll call you on Monday. And then they call you on Monday. What is it that you exactly need? This and that and that. Okay, we'll look it up for you and we'll forward it to you. So you get it even Monday night, Tuesday. So then you're already working from the Thursday and you're not getting the antemortem information until Tuesday or Wednesday. You lose a week.
Yeah.
While if you have a central database with dental treatments that me as a forensic odontologist, with a special key, I could get into it and get out what I need, then I would get it on the Thursday. And I pleaded in the media for that. And I said, please let us start something like that. And now I've got some colleagues in other countries, other European countries, and saying, yeah, great idea. Germany had been facing the same problems. And I said, well, let's sit together and, let's talk to the European Union and see if we can't convince them to do this at European level. So that would be very easy, because then if you have an unidentified body and a missing body, for example, you could just run these things through this dental database and find out eventually if you can do reconciliation and identification. I'm well aware, Eugene, that it will take time, and there's the issue of privacy and whatever. But I don't think it's a point. Privacy is not a point. We don't need this to go into it and look at it. No, you need to have a special permit to do that, and only in cases of. I've had a couple of cases of Belgians dying abroad, and where again the whole process of antemortem gathering was so retarded by the administrative and legal way of getting something that again we lost over a week while we were almost sure that it was that person. And that's sad. We're not doing this for us. It's for the relatives. It's for the people, the family that are waiting.
Mm-hmm.
They want an answer as quick as possible. Every day they have to wait is a day too long.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions here, if you don't mind. I'm going to bring them up, and they're both related. So let me bring them up here, and then I'll pose the question to you. But basically, Gail D'Souza is saying that if I was interested in assisting or doing this kind of work with a team, where would I start? And also, there is another question here that's related, and this is from Asghar Asgarli, and thank you for this talk. After her master's in forensic anthropology, she'd like to apply for a DVI team. What is your advice for a student as the next steps? So my questions to you are, what training is available to people? Because I know you teach and you do training as well.
Actually, we just finished a forensic odontology and DVI training last year. It was a 5-month training, 1 full day a month. And we gave them the full forensic odontology material, and then every time linked to DVI. So that's one thing. There are a few places where you can get a training in forensic odontology. Unfortunately, I have to say the number is decreasing. But anyway, that's the first thing to do. And then, well, you have to try to find out if your country has a DVI team, and then try to join them. Go talk to the DVI commander and say, hey, listen, these are my credentials. This is what I can do. This is what I can bring you. I might be an asset to your team. Can you use me? And then you'll have to go into DVI training, which is what we provide as well. we set up a DVI team in Malta after they got the presidency of the European Union. We trained policemen, policemen basically, but also scientists from the police, South African police. So we gave them a 1 week training, 5 full days.
So when you have a DVI team, I just wanted to ask you this because, I mean, you're obviously the forensic odontologist, but what kind of other people do you have there? Like, so for example, do you have like photographers, like professional, like forensic photographers?
Yeah.
Like who else?
The photographers are mostly from the scientific labs from the Federal Police. So they are policemen. Then we have DNA guys. They work for I'm talking about Belgium. They're working for the National Institute for Criminalistics and Criminology. That's the part of the Ministry of Justice. We have anthropologists. They're mostly linked to universities.
Mm-hmm.
We have odontologists. Actually, and pathologists, of course. The pathologists, odontologists, and anthropologists are what we call external experts, which means they're not police people.
Yeah.
So they have to be called in, but it's a regular team. It's just we're a member of the DVI team, but strictly spoken, we are not police.
Right.
There are some countries where the scientists do belong to the police forces or to the military. I know Brazil, for example. I know Indonesia. They are part of the system, and so Germany they use some, but mostly there are external experts. And then of course you got, just to give you an example, in Belgium I told you we've got 7 permanent people, and then apart from those we got a pool of about 150 people, policemen, who are ready, who can be standby at any time. We give them regular training, we give them regular upgrading from the training, and we train them in all aspects of DVI.
I see.
I even give them, like a 1-day course on odontology, purely odontology, and then, related to DVI and to identification. And this is repeated every year.
Okay. Do you know if there are any internship programs or volunteer programs for students or other type of professional volunteers?
I don't think at Interpol, because Interpol is a police organization. And maybe, I should ask our police guys. But I don't think so, because all people that work at Interpol, they are police people that are seconded by their country to Interpol for a certain term. They got an assignment for 3 years or 6 years, and then they go back and they do another job.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I would have to ask about that.
Another question I have is, who pays for all this stuff? So, I mean, there's flights, there's equipment, there's all this other stuff. Where does the funding come from?
Government.
Yeah.
In Belgium it's different. It depends. If it's a disaster in Belgium, well, of course the police, they just do their job. They're paid their fees, their wage. We as external experts, if it's in Belgium, we are paid by the Ministry of Justice, and they have fixed salaries per hour, per diem. Sometimes we can, if it's a long time commitment, let's say a week or so, we will have a contract with the Minister of Justice, and we will have a per diem salary that we get. All the rest,
like for example,
Belgium,
Thailand.
That was then it's different ministries that sit together. We call it the Kern Cabinet, and they decide, yes, Belgium is going to send a team, and then the government's picking up everything.
I see.
So they pay for the flight, they arrange everything, they pay for the flight, they pay for the hotel, they pay for the food, and they pay the, let's say, the salaries or the remuneration, whatever you want to call it.
Right. What about, there was an article that I had read where I believe you had commented that, this area is not very well funded. So both
Yeah.
for maybe equipment and possibly and also there are research opportunities as well. So do you have any comments about that?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're underfunded. When I see, of course, DVI being police, the money has to come from the police, and which means that it has to come from the Ministry of the Interior. And well, there's never enough money.
Mm-hmm.
So every year it's a battle. Okay, we would need this, we would need that, and I know from our DVI commander they have the hardest time getting those things. That's, for example, the reason that when I was pleading to buy a Nomad after the terrorist attacks, because I explained that it was thanks to that Nomad that was brought to us by these people that we did such good work. And I said, but why can't we have 10,000 euro to buy this? And they said, well, it's too much. That was the answer we got from the.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I go to the media then and I explain to them, and it was funny and actually reconforting that some people said, hey, let's just start a crowdfunding for these guys. Let's find 10 people who want to donate 1,000 euros so that these odontologists can buy this Nomad device.
Okay.
We finally got it, but it's the same every time. It's not just for us. It's
yeah, it's a struggle.
new cameras. Oh no, we don't have the money for new cameras. Yeah. It's disappointing.
Yeah. I have another question. Asker has another question. I think it's a very good one, and I haven't asked you yet. But what was one of the most difficult cases in your career that you can recall?
Well, definitely some of the victims of the terrorist attacks, because there are a few that stick with me, and that I will very often refer to. If I go back in history, the Tarom disaster, airplane crash in Bucharest, 1995, was very difficult because the plane came down right after taking off, nose down, so it caused a big crater, and you can imagine the impact on the victims.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to try to identify people from little fragment jaws with 2 or 3 teeth. And I remember that we had quite a number left over that we couldn't bring to someone. So we finally decided to do DNA, to extract DNA from those teeth. And we got 6 more identifications out of the DNA analysis from dental material. That was a novelty at that time in 1995. We were very proud that we had done that. Another case was we call them the weekend victims. A car with 7 young people, partying,
Mm-hmm.
and they hit a truck in the back, and the car caught fire, and they couldn't escape of it. So carbonization on those bodies was very, very, very heavy. And we had to be very, very careful, not to destroy, because teeth become very brittle after a long time in the fire. The heat just dehydrate teeth, and then you have to work with more than white gloves. And fortunately, there are techniques now to handle it.
Right.
But that was also very difficult. And then, as I said, the terrorist attacks again. Those bombs impact big destruction, and the the difficulty of getting antemortem records, because an identification being difficult doesn't always mean that it's technically difficult. But it may also mean that either you don't have the AM information. And don't forget, identification is always based on comparison of antemortem and postmortem data.
Mm-hmm.
The postmortem data, mostly you got them because they're there ahead of you. Although I must say, in that 1995 Taron disaster, we had one non-identified victim. And when I saw the antemortem record, it was an American lady. When I saw the antemortem record, it was full of fillings, dental treatment, crowns, bridges, and I thought, wow, this is going to be the first one I'm identifying. We never identified her. We never found any post-mortem, any dental thing that we could link to this great antemortem record. Mostly it's the opposite.
Interesting. Yeah.
But it was so funny. Then we did that. We went home. We went back to Romania for getting the DNA material, and they said, "Hey, doctor, we got 17 more jaw fragments for you that they had found on the disaster scene."
Mm-hmm.
And then I came back from my holidays, and there was a big box from Romania with another 12 jaw fragments. The farmers had started working on the fields again, and these came to the surface, and they sent it to me, and we analyzed them. But still, that one lady, it's probably the only one that I never got to identify in my whole career.
Yeah, that's difficult. That's tough. Just a couple more questions here, and then I'm gonna let you go here. But one is, what is next for you? Like, what is your main focus right now? Are you sort of focusing on trying to get a database established? Are you looking at other areas potentially with research? What is your main focus?
Yeah, well, that database, definitely, that's one thing. A second thing is training and getting young people interested in forensic odontology. That's a problem that we are facing now. We're all getting a little bit older, and we're not going to be there forever. So we try to get to younger dentists. The problem is, let me be honest, is the remuneration.
Mm.
You make a lot more money when you stay in your office. For me, it was a deliberate choice from the beginning. I'm going to work, let's say, 75% in my office, and 25% I'm going to dedicate to forensic odontology, regardless. And it could be more when there was a disaster, because then at that time, I just shut down my office. I canceled my appointments, and I said, sorry, I have to go now. That's the second thing. A third thing is definitely in the field of research. I've got the feeling that there are quite a number of new developments that we will benefit from in forensic odontology. 3D scanning, 3D printing, artificial intelligence. These are just new things that I believe where the sky will be the limit, if there is a limit. And I'm really happy to see that at some universities, some or good research is already done. I can see that I'm a reviewer for a number of scientific journals, and sometimes some of these articles are brought to my attention. Say, okay, can you review this and da da da, and I think there is some more future, despite the fact that, for example, in the US, bite marks is now considered junk science. I believe that with new techniques, there might still be a place for bite mark analysis in the future.
Yeah. Eddy, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, I know that you're on LinkedIn as well, but is there any place in particular that they can contact you if they want more information or anything like that?
They can contact me through LinkedIn. They can contact me on my email. Yeah,
Okay.
if they just type in on the internet Eddy De Valck, they will get an email address, and it will come to me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm getting quite a lot through LinkedIn, and it's nice to see that people are interested, and especially young people. I see that India is a booming market in forensic odontology.
Hmm.
They're doing great work there, all the universities, and they're all young people. So that's something to be happy about.
Yes, for sure. Eddy, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Just great insight, wonderful experience you have. And yeah, I wish you all continued success with your work.
Thank you, Eugene. It was my pleasure being here and sharing this with all kind of people. I've noticed that there were quite a number of, we call them old friends, um, in the audience.
Yes.
So, hey guys, good to have you there.
Nice.
And to the new ones, welcome.
Well, hang back. Don't hang up just yet. Just hang back, and then I'll come back and I'll chat with you in just a bit.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right, everyone. Well, that's it. That does it for this particular episode. We will be back next week, and we're going to be having another one of our forensics talks. So thanks everybody for the great comments and everything else. Again, thank you to Eddy. Some great information. So I want to wish you all the best, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.